Close your eyes and imagine an ocean, not of water, but of grass. An ocean so vast it dissolves the idea of edges. 40 million acres of blue grama and buffalo grass roll endlessly beneath a sky so wide it feels unfinished, as if the world paused here and never resumed construction. The horizon offers no relief, no trees, no hills, no landmarks to anchor the eye. Just movement, wind-driven waves of grass stretching farther than thought. This was Montana in the early 1880s. To those arriving from the east, it looked like abundance without consequence, a promised land where effort seemed optional and reward inevitable. Grass was everywhere. Winters were rumored to be forgiving. Cattle, they said, could feed themselves year-round. All a man needed was courage, capital, and patience. The myth spread faster than the truth ever could. Newspapers called it free grass. Investment circulars painted ranching as a clean equation: buy cattle, turn them loose, and collect profit. Men who had never slept under an open sky or felt prairie wind cut through wool poured money into the territory. Capital arrived from New York, from London, from Paris. Ledgers replaced instincts. Distance dulled responsibility. The land, however, was not impressed. For generations, survival here had depended on reading signs too subtle for paper reports: the color of grass in late summer, the timing of migrations, the thickness of an animal's winter coat, the behavior of water long before ice formed. These were not theories, they were warnings written into the landscape itself. By 1886, those warnings were unmistakable. The ranges were overstocked beyond recovery. Too many mouths pressed the land too hard, stripping grass down to its roots. What once held moisture and warmth through winter was reduced to brittle stubble. The system that had sustained bison herds for centuries was being asked to support something it was never designed for unchecked extraction. That summer was relentless. Heat pressed down day after day, drying the soil until it cracked. Streams thinned into muddy threads. Waterholes vanished. Dust followed every hoofstep. Grass stopped rebounding. Animals walked farther for less nourishment, their bodies quietly burning reserves meant for winter. Still more cattle arrived. Those financing the operation never stood in that heat. They never watched herds spread thin across exhausted land. They never heard the silence that settles over a prairie when life begins conserving energy instead of growing. From far away, numbers still looked promising. From the ground, the range was already failing. Then came the autumn. Warm, unsettlingly warm. It felt like confirmation that the optimistic forecasts had been right all along. Ranchers delayed cutting hay, delayed moving herds to shelter, delayed preparation. They trusted the Chinook winds, the warm mountain breaths that had saved winters before sweeping snow away and reopening the grass even in January. Comfort breeds forgetfulness. They forgot that the Chinook does not arrive on command. They forgot that weather remembers nothing of profit margins. They forgot the old understanding passed quietly among those who had survived long enough to fear winter properly. Winter does not negotiate. Indigenous elders noticed the changes early. Wildlife moved sooner and lower than usual. Elk shifted routes. Birds disappeared weeks ahead of schedule. Cattle grew coats thicker than memory allowed. These were not coincidences, they were signals. Warnings were given, they were dismissed. Progress had no patience for caution. Experience was labeled superstition. The old ways were treated as obstacles rather than safeguards. Confidence filled the gap where preparation should have been. By the time the first snow fell, everything fragile was already exposed. Overstocked ranges, exhausted animals, no reserves, no shelter, no margin for error. All that remained was for the sky to make its move, and the land, patient as it has always been, was ready to teach its lesson. It began without ceremony. On November 16th, the temperature did not ease downward the way people expected winter to arrive. It collapsed. In a matter of hours, the air fell from mild autumn warmth into deep, punishing cold. What had been rain turned to needles of ice before it touched the ground. The land did not prepare, it was seized. This was not a storm in the ordinary sense. It was a siege. The cold arrived with speed and precision, shutting down movement, judgment, and mercy all at once. Thermometers dropped past zero and kept going, sinking into numbers people rarely spoke aloud. 30 below, 40, 50. In some places, colder still. At those temperatures, air itself becomes an instrument of harm. Skin burns without flame. Metal steals heat faster than flesh can give it. Breath crystallizes the moment it leaves the lungs. People who lived through it gave the cold a name. They called it the whisper of death, the faint crackling sound made when exhalation freezes mid-air, a reminder that survival was being measured second by second. The cold did not lift. Days passed, then weeks, then months. For more than 100 consecutive days, the temperature refused to rise above zero. Snow did not fall gently. It arrived in violent waves driven sideways by wind that erased direction and distance. Landmarks vanished, trails disappeared. The prairie became a white void where movement itself became dangerous. The cattle had nowhere to go. Blinded by whiteouts, herds drifted instinctively, pushed by wind. They could not escape. They searched for shelter that did not exist. When they reached newly strung barbed wire fences, they stopped, not understanding the obstacle pressing forward, until the front animals collapsed and the rest piled in behind them. Many froze standing upright, packed so tightly that when spring came, they remained frozen in place like statues scattered across the plains. Others wandered until exhaustion overtook them. Snow crusted over the grass, sealing it beneath ice. Animals pawed until their hooves bled, spending more energy than they could afford. Hunger weakened them. Cold finished the work. In towns, the collapse became visible. Thousands of starving steers wandered into streets, bawling ribs, exposed eyes dull. They chewed saplings down to splinters, ripped into refuse piles, ate anything that carried the faint memory of nourishment. Their presence was not aggressive. It was desperate, a living indictment of decisions made far away. By January, isolation was complete. Telegraph lines snapped beneath the weight of ice. Communication with the outside world vanished. Rail lines disappeared under drifts taller than buildings. Trains sat frozen in place, half buried, useless. Supplies could not move. Help could not arrive. Communities were sealed inside the weather. Inside cabins, the situation was no better. Most frontier homes were built to fight summer heat, not winter cold. Walls leaked air, roofs shed snow, but also shed warmth. Fires burned constantly, consuming wood faster than it could be replaced. Families dismantled fences, furniture, anything that would burn. Some ran out anyway. The cold worked inward. People became disoriented. Whiteout erased familiar paths. Men froze within sight of their doors. Others lay down for rest and never rose again. Silence followed. Not dramatic silence, but the kind that settles when life pulls inward and then stops. This was the great die-up. It was not a single event, but a grinding process, a slow, systematic stripping away of anything unprepared. Nature did not rage. It applied pressure and waited. Weak systems failed first. Overconfidence followed. Those who had trusted abundance instead of balance discovered how quickly excess turns into liability. Yet even in this landscape of loss, survival was not random. In pockets of the hills, in places shaped by older knowledge, some people endured. They burned less wood. They stayed warmer. They remained connected to the ground while the wind raged overhead. Their homes did not fight the storm. They absorbed it. While thousands froze on open ground and in drafty cabins, one woman near the hills lived through the same winter in relative warmth. proving that the land itself had always offered protection if one knew how to listen. The difference was not strength, it was understanding, and understanding in that winter became the rarest resource of all. While the cold dismantled confidence across the open-range survival quietly took a different shape in the hills. Near Lewistown, where the land folded into itself instead of stretching flat and exposed, Sarah Lindholm made a choice that others considered reckless. She did not build upward into the wind. She cut inward, carving her home into a south-facing slope, letting the earth close around her walls on 3 sides. Neighbors said she was burying herself alive. Some said she would suffocate. Others said snow would seal her in forever. Sarah ignored them. She had not learned her building instincts from manuals or speculation. She learned them from memory, from stories carried across the Atlantic, from a grandfather who understood that winter is not defeated, it is managed. In northern Sweden, survival was never about overpowering the cold. It was about refusing to expose yourself to it in the first place. The principle was simple, though few understood it. At the time, the earth is not cold, it is stable. At roughly 8 feet below the surface, the ground holds a nearly constant temperature year-round. In central Montana, that temperature hovered around 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Not warm, but alive. When the air above plunged to -40, the soil remained unchanged. It did not panic, it did not fluctuate, it endured. Sarah built around that truth. Her cabin used the earth as insulation, not decoration. Thick soil buffered the walls, absorbing wind and holding heat. The structure did not need to fight temperature swings because the ground erased them, while others relied on constant fire to survive. Sarah's home began each winter day already above freezing. She added another layer of intelligence above her head. Instead of separating animals from people, she stacked their needs. Her barn sat directly atop her living quarters. The livestock were not just sheltered, they were part of the heating system. Their body heat rose through the floorboards, warming the rooms below in a slow, steady exchange. No machinery, no fuel, just physics and patience. This was not cleverness, it was alignment. While frontier cabins leaked heat into the wind, Sarah's home allowed the wind to pass overhead, carving snowdrifts harmlessly away from the entrance. The roof breathed. Moisture escaped gradually instead of freezing into lethal condensation. The walls absorbed pressure rather than resisting it. The structure behaved less like a building and more like terrain. During one of the worst blows of the winter, a multi-day storm that killed dozens inside their own homes, Sarah opened her door to find the local reverend and several others barely conscious from exposure. They had been traveling a short distance when the storm erased direction entirely. She brought them inside. They later described the room as unreal. Outside, the world was lethal. Inside, the temperature held near 60 degrees, not hot, not luxurious, but survivable. While others fed fires endlessly, just to delay freezing, Sarah burned less than half the wood of a standard cabin. Her resources stretched because her design did not waste them. This was the architecture of Earth, not domination, integration. The difference mattered. Cabins built to stand apart from the land were punished for it. Those built as extensions of the land endured. Some of these Earth-integrated homes would last 80 winters, or more long after surface structures collapsed or were abandoned. They aged, slowly protected by the same forces that destroyed everything else. Modern language would later call this bioclimatic design, passive heating, thermal mass, wind management. But none of those words existed for Sarah Lindholm in 1886. She did not need terminology, she needed shelter. Her success exposed an uncomfortable truth. The problem was never that Montana was too cold. The problem was that people insisted on building as if it weren't. The Great Die-Up did not just kill cattle and break fortunes, it revealed a flaw in thinking. the belief that human structures could ignore local reality and still survive. Sarah Lindholm proved otherwise not through theory, but through endurance. She did not conquer winter. She stepped aside and let the land do the work. And in that choice lay the difference between freezing and living. When the first signs of spring finally reached Montana in 1887, they did not arrive as relief. They arrived as exposure. Snow did not melt all at once. It retreated, slowly peeling back layers that had hidden the cost of the winter. What emerged was not grass, but absence, not renewal, but inventory. The land revealed what had been taken and what had been lost. Across the plains, carcasses lay where herds had fallen. Some were scattered, others piled against fences or natural barriers where animals had pressed together in their final moments. Hide stretched tight over bone. Horns protruded from snowbanks. In many places, the ground itself seemed paved with death. The great sea of grass had become a graveyard. The scale of loss was difficult to comprehend. In some regions, 60% of cattle were gone. In others, closer to 90%. Entire operations vanished in a single season. Fortunes that had taken years to assemble dissolved without ceremony. Investors thousands of miles away woke to the reality that ownership meant nothing when the system itself failed. But numbers told only part of the story. As the thaw continued, human losses came into view. Cowboys were found where they had fallen disoriented by whiteouts, frozen within yards of shelter they could not see. Others lay near burned-out fire pits, having exhausted every available source of heat. Cabins were discovered with doors still closed, families inside, having run out of fuel and time together quietly without witness. The winter had not been selective. It had taken the inexperienced and the confident alike. In the midst of this devastation, a young night herder named Charles Marion Russell was asked a simple question by his employer: "How is the herd holding up?" Russell did not answer with words. He sent an image, a small watercolor painting titled "Waiting for a Chinook." It showed a single steer standing alone. Ribs exposed, head-lowered snow pressed hard against its flanks. Wolves lingered at the edges of the scene, not attacking, merely waiting. The animal was not fighting anymore. It was enduring the inevitable. The painting captured something statistics could not: the stillness that follows when hope has been exhausted. The image traveled quickly. It became a symbol of the great die-up, not because it dramatized suffering, but because it refused to exaggerate it. There was no panic in the scene, only consequence. For Montana, the reckoning was total. The open-range system collapsed almost overnight. The idea that land could absorb unlimited pressure without response was buried under the snow along with the cattle. Large absentee-owned outfits folded. The era of speculation ended. Survival no longer belonged to those with the most animals, but to those who understood limits. What emerged in the aftermath was quieter, smaller, more deliberate. Survivors were often local operators who had prepared hay, limited herd size, and paid attention to the land's capacity rather than investor expectations. They had read the signs and adjusted before winter forced the issue. They did not escape loss, but they endured it. The spring of 1887 did not feel like renewal. It felt like accounting. The land had issued its terms. Those who ignored them paid in full. And yet, from the bones and silence, a different Montana began to take shape, one built less on illusion and more on restraint. The winter had stripped away excess and exposed structure. It revealed which ways of living belonged to the land and which had been imposed upon it. The Great Die-Up was not remembered simply because it was severe. It was remembered because it ended something permanently. The fantasy of the Golden Range did not survive the thaw. Only those willing to change did. The winter of 1886 did more than destroy herds and fortunes. It ended an idea. The belief that land could be treated as endless and forgiving, died beneath the snow. The great die-up forced a reckoning that no argument or market correction ever could. It revealed that survival on the plains was not about scale speed or optimism. It was about restraint, preparation, and respect for limits that had always existed, whether people acknowledged them or not. In the years that followed, Montana changed its habits. The open range faded, not out of sentiment but necessity. Ranchers began fencing land not as a symbol of ownership, but as a tool of recovery. Pastures were rested, grazing was controlled. The soil was allowed to rebuild its strength instead of being stripped season after season. Hayfields replaced blind dependence on winter grass. Barns were built not for convenience but for certainty. Animals would never again be expected to face a northern winter without shelter and stored feed. What emerged was not abundance without effort, but sustainability with intention. The survivors understood something the previous system had ignored. Resilience is built long before crisis arrives. It is built in quiet seasons, in choices that look inefficient, to outsiders in preparation that feels unnecessary, until it becomes the difference between loss and endurance. The same lesson applied to homes. Structures that endured were not the tallest or the most impressive. They were the ones that listened. Earth-integrated dwellings, sod houses, dugouts, and hillside cabins quietly proved their worth. They demanded less fuel. They wasted less heat. They worked with gravity insulation and the steady temperature of the ground instead of fighting the wind and sky. What Sarah Lindholm built was not an anomaly. It was a continuation of knowledge shared across cultures and centuries. From Scandinavian earth homes to indigenous lodges, humans had long understood how to survive cold by reducing exposure, not increasing resistance. That understanding had been dismissed as primitive just long enough to be nearly lost. Today, modern language has begun circling back to the same conclusions. Architects speak of passive solar gain thermal mass and bioclimatic design. Engineers rediscover earth sheltering. Planners praise energy efficiency and resilience. The ideas sound new because the memory of their origin has faded, but the wisdom is old. To those who have lived long enough to see cycles repeat, this feels familiar. We know that progress does not always move forward in a straight line. Sometimes it forgets. Sometimes it relearns. The Great Die-Up stands as a reminder that innovation without humility is fragile, and convenience without foresight carries a hidden cost. The deeper lesson of 1886 is not about weather, it is about relationship. Homes that survive are not imposed on land. They belong to it. Food systems that endure do not extract endlessly, they regenerate. Communities that last are not built on isolation, but cooperation on neighbors who share warnings, labor, and shelter when systems fail. Even today, remnants of that earlier era remain scattered across Montana. Collapsed sod walls, earth-sheltered foundations half swallowed by grass, quiet depressions in hillsides where warmth once waited out the wind. They are easy to miss unless you know what you are looking for. They are not monuments, they are lessons. As uncertainty becomes a constant, again climate-shifting supply lines, thinning systems stretched thin, the Great Die-Up offers clarity. Strength alone does not ensure survival. Flexibility does. Preparedness does. Listening does. Nature does not break what is strong. It breaks what is rigid. The people who endured that winter did not do so because they dominated the land. They survived because they became part of it, and that more than any modern solution remains the most reliable path forward. The wisdom of the hills has not vanished. It has only been waiting for us to remember.